So you're early in your composing journey. You've just finished a piece of music. You're thrilled by it. You're excited to share it. You want to get feedback on it to learn to improve. So you post it online and you're excited to see what people come back with. But what comes back is a devastating torrent of abuse and criticism. It's a surprisingly common experience, and I've come across several people who've just totally given up composing because of this experience. Or maybe they carry on very quietly and tentatively composing, but they don't share it with anyone, they keep it to themselves, and all the joy goes out of the process. And it's a process that should bring so much joy into our lives. So this video is because I don't want this to happen to you, and if it has happened to you, I don't want it to keep happening to you, and I don't want you to not know how to recover from it. So we're going to give you two sets of tips. In the first part, there's going to be 6 tips on what we can do to avoid unconsciously attracting this sort of criticism. You know, and a lot of this comes from my own experience because I've made several of these mistakes myself. And in the second half of the video, we're going to give you 6 more tips on what to do if it does happen, because it'll happen anyway, whatever precautions we take, and how can we manage ourselves, how can we interact in a way that minimizes the impact it has on us. The first point is to be as clear and specific as you can be about what sort of feedback it is that you're looking for, because often people put music up and they say, give me some feedback on my piece. And if that's being listened to by an experienced composer, somebody who really understands how things fit together, they're going to see a lot of interrelated weaknesses in that piece. And so it's a big ask for them to expect them to basically unpick everything and give you a really detailed analysis. Many people don't have time for that. They don't have the inclination to sort of give that sort of tailored, detailed feedback. And some people might be unhappy about being expected to do such a thing. They might see it as you presuming upon them. And so that's one of the things that can lead to an antagonistic response. So one way to get around this is to take it upon ourselves to be as clear as we can about what sort of feedback we're wanting. We need to identify what sort of feedback we need. So rather than just saying, this is my latest piece, tell me what you think of it, how about, this is my latest piece. In my previous piece, I was getting some feedback that I wasn't very good at managing the registers and all the instruments were clashing. And I've really tried to address this in this piece. And I want to know how I've done. And I'm particularly interested in how it sounds, I don't know, between 35 seconds and 45 seconds, because that's the part that I'm not too sure about. That gives people who are listening a very detailed focus, a very specific focus about what you want from them, and something that they can much better fulfill. The second point is not to just shove your piece randomly in any and every group. Don't blanket post. Make sure that the group that you've chosen to post your music is suitable for the sort of music that you have and the sort of feedback that you want. So for example, if you've done a classical piece of music, a string quartet or something, don't post that in a group, or don't necessarily post it in a group that is more about film music and media music, or vice versa, because they'll be looking for different things and they'll be valuing different things in the music. If you are a beginner, don't post your long first ever piece of music onto a group where it's mostly very experienced composers talking about real technicalities of orchestration or something like that. Make sure that the group you choose is a match for the sort of feedback that you want, both in the content and in the tone that they communicate. A couple of groups that I found really useful, well, one that's by far given me the most is VI Control, which has a whole load of forums. One of them is about composing, and I've met people on that forum who've been so generous, very, very experienced people, but so generous in terms of, reaching out to me, even on a personal level, and giving me very detailed feedback, sometimes even offering to rework parts of my track so that I can better understand what went wrong and how to do things better. It's been an extremely valuable resource for me. It doesn't happen every time, but it's happened a few times, and I'm very grateful for that. Reddit actually has been, I've only discovered it recently, there's a composer forum on that, and that's been surprisingly active and supportive actually in many ways. And actually in advance of doing this video, I put a post about dealing with criticism on that forum, and got a lot of responses from people, and I've drawn on a lot of their experiences in making this video. Next tip is, once you've chosen your community or communities, don't just say, I finished my piece of music and then just shove it on there. Get to know the community a bit first, interact with them. A lot of these communities have in their sort of guidelines, give as much as you get, give as much as you ask for. So maybe before posting your own music, maybe you can interact. I mean, it's a nice thing to do anyway, to listen to the sorts of things that other people are putting up there. Even if you're just a beginner, you can participate in the sense of sharing what you're working on and congratulating the other person for having mastered that, because you sort of see that they're doing what you'd like to do in a certain area. And then when you come to post your own music, people will be more open to you because they will know something about you. They might be more favourable to you in terms of giving your music a more favourable listen, because they've got familiarity with you as a person, because you've been interacting with them. And you might get more responses as well, because you've been more interactive and you're seen as more as part of the group. So yeah, that's the third tip, respecting your community. The fourth one's a bit more tricky because it involves a bit of self-awareness. It's about being honest about what our intentions are in asking for feedback. Do we only want feedback on the music? Is that the only thing we're looking for? Or are we also looking for other things? Are we looking for affirmation of our music and of ourselves in certain ways? Because that's not likely to come particularly. You know, composers aren't well known as a group for being complimentary or enthusiastic about each other's work. That's actually probably true across most disciplines. When you're working in the same area as what you're giving feedback on, you tend to be much more critical. And so there's not that much, I don't see that much appreciation of other people's work. There's a lot of very useful feedback on these forums, but composers are not the place to look if you're wanting affirmation. Or maybe you're just wanting a community. You're just wanting a sense of community, and the music is a way of perhaps facilitating that. And again, that's probably not what most people are looking for on these music groups, although it might exist in certain places. But if you're not clear what you want, a couple of things happen. One is you're probably going to be disappointed by what comes back to you. And the second thing is it might antagonize other people, because if you've got an unspoken agenda, even if you're not aware of it, there are people who will, you know, hone in on that, tune in on it, and probably not be very favorable towards it. And so that's another way that we can sort of unwittingly attract the negative sort of reaction that we don't want. Even if we're clear about our intentions, clear with ourselves, we might still express them in a way that triggers other people. And sometimes we only know this after the event. We only know it with trial and error. So one example is an example I had where when I started composing, I always used to stress that I was coming at it in a more intuitive way. And I think probably my reason for saying that was to sort of say, I don't have the background, don't expect too much from me, be kind, don't be too unkind with the feedback. But that's not how it came across to people. And also when I started making videos about intuitive composing and about this sort of different way of approaching the composing process, people took it in a very different way than what I intended. There were several people who reacted to that as if I was belittling the study of music theory, and as if I was, you know, what one person even said, oh, you seem to think that you're above everybody else, and that you have this gift that you can compose in a way that nobody else can. It couldn't be farther from where I was coming from, but I probably wasn't sensitive enough to the fact that people have put their whole lives into studying music theory, and any suggestion that it might not be the only way, unless it's very sensitively handled, might be triggering, and it was. So I'm now much more careful about how I talk about that, and I always caveat it in a way that is probably annoying to people who don't need it, but it's, you know, it's hopefully more respectful for people who do get triggered by that sort of thing. And finally, while it's fine to put things out online and get feedback from communities that you find, the best feedback is from people who you know. The best feedback is from real people who you can interact with on a one-to-one basis, who've got some understanding of you as well as of the composing process. But it can go beyond composers as well. So, you know, musicians can often be very good sources of feedback, sometimes better than composers, because they know how their instruments sound. They know what it would be like to play a certain thing more than some other composers might. But that's not always easy. It's not always, for example, in my experience, I came to composing unexpectedly at the age of 52. So I don't have any music connections. And also the sort of music that I'm sort of seem to be writing now is not the sort of music that the non-music people that I know are very interested in. So there's not always these avenues available to everybody, but if they are available, they're good ones to pursue. Now, you can be as careful as you want, and you can take as many precautions as you want, but the abuse will still come sometimes. There's nothing you can do about that. People are as they are, and some of them will find you at some point, and it will come. And the advice that you hear most often about this is just rise above it. But that's not always so easy. Depending on your personality type, that might be easy for you. It might just have a superficial effect. It might not last very long. You might be able to snap out of it or easily reason your way out of it. Or it might hang around for longer. It might affect you more deeply. It might be more debilitating. I told you before about some cases where it's actually stopped people from composing. They've given up on that part of their lives, which could have been so fulfilling. And that's not a sign of weakness. You know, it's just that people process things in different ways. And somebody in relation to this sent me a video from the 1980s of Margret Thatcher, who's not known for being a soft and sensitive individual, talking about how debilitating intense criticism was for her, and how she protected herself from it because it actually stopped her getting on with her work properly.
Some of the other remarks are, well, they hurt. And I find it very difficult. If it looks horrid or someone tells me it's horrid, I won't read it. I've seen the effect on other politicians. They are hurt and they are deeply wounded. It bothers you so much that you then are not in a position to make the kind of judgments that you ought to make.
So in this section, we're going to offer some quick ideas about how we might be able to deal with this stuff if it comes up. We're going to approach it from a number of different angles. So not everything will be a great fit for everybody, but hopefully there'll be something for everybody in this. Firstly, however aggressive or abusive somebody is in the way they talk to you, there might be something useful in the feedback they give at the same time. So we can't be responsible for how other people express themselves. But one way to look at it is, if we're going to have to go through the experience of receiving this negativity, we might as well get something from it. And if alongside the attitude, there's also something that's really useful that could help us in our music, let's at least take the benefit of that. If there's actually nothing very useful in the criticism and it's just pure abuse and you feel bad about it, one thing you can do if you feel the need to is to check out the music of the person who's being abusive. It's interesting because often you'll find that either they've got nothing out there, they're just turning up and abusing people without putting themselves in that situation of receiving anything, or they do put music out and it's so different to the sort of thing that you want to be aspiring to, that it sort of makes the criticism a little bit less relevant. You might even think that it's not very good sometimes. And that can sort of take the edge, can take the sting out of it, because you sort of realise that the person giving you the criticism isn't necessarily somebody who you want to aspire to be like. Ideally, a good way of looking at it is that, you know, if people are confident in themselves and if people have a sense of inner security and inner self-esteem, there's no way they're going to be criticising other people. And it's almost that when somebody criticises in an unkind way, not just giving constructive criticism, but, you know, giving a bit of abuse or aggressiveness alongside it, it's often a sign, you know, it's a giveaway sign that those people aren't happy and secure in themselves. And when you see really credible composers who are obviously very confident in what they do, so I'm thinking like when you see people like Jacob Collier giving, you know, answering questions from composers and musicians, whatever they ask him, he's so affirming, so respectful. He never denigrates anything that anybody says. It's almost like he goes out of his way to try to give encouragement and to give, you know, esteem to the people who are asking him questions and to give them sort of self-confidence. So when people don't do that, they're almost advertising the fact of how unhappy they are and how insecure they are in themselves. And so if we can find compassion within ourselves for those people, even while they're being abusive, that would be the ideal reaction, because they actually need that in a way that might not be immediately apparent. One person shared with me that he makes a point of keeping any feedback that's not, that doesn't seem clear to him, so that when he comes to it in the future, and he's a little bit more developed at that time, it might make more sense. And that makes a lot of sense to me as well. I remember at the beginning, the example about registers clashing was something that I had a lot in the early pieces that I wrote. I got a lot of feedback on the fact that, you know, the music itself might have had some nice ideas in it, but I was really not very mindful of the registers, and the instruments were sort of clashing in register. And I didn't really understand all of the feedback at the time that I was getting. One person wrote to me something like, he said, you can obviously hear the lines, but can you hear the space between the lines? And I remember that because I was so confused by it at the time, and I was really irritated. I thought this person was just like giving me cryptic clues or just trying to confuse me or something like that. But actually later, when I came to understand what that meant, and I came to understand the importance of like leaving space between individual lines of music so that the human ear can actually discern them and pick them out, that made sense to me. And now, okay, in that case I needed to do all of the learning before the criticism made sense. But there'll be times when you know, when you get a little bit further down the path, then you look back at that old piece of feedback that you got, and it contains something that you can do something with now that you couldn't have done at the time. 2 or 3 people actually responded to me that they like to be their own worst critic. The idea is that if I'm hard on my own music, nobody can say anything to me that is worse than I'm saying to myself, so I'm not going to be hurt by it. Now, this is a piece of advice that I'm not that comfortable with, because it seems to be putting much more effort, much more emphasis on trying to protect yourself from the pain of receiving criticism but at the expense of your relationship with the music, which is what the composing process is all about. And it's probably not going to work anyway, because in many cases the painful thing about receiving abusive feedback is not the feedback on the music, because that's very useful, it's the abusive tone that it's offered in. So by being unkind about your own music, you're not protecting yourself from that. You're sort of actually destroying your relationship with your music at the same time as leaving yourself just as open to any abuse that comes your way as part of the feedback process. I love the music that I make. Even the old stuff, the stuff that I did at the very, very beginning, which I can see is full of things that I would do differently now, things that you could call flaws. And I'm sure I will love my music in the future that I'm making now, even though I'm able to see at that time all of the problems with that. And that's not an arrogance. That's not sort of elevating myself or anything. It's like, if that's not the case, why would we be composing anyway? The music that we make, and this is especially true for intuitive composers, because it's going to be less filters. It's going to come straight from something very deep within. The music that we make carries our signature as beings in a way that nothing else does. And if we can't love and enjoy our own music, it says something about ourselves. It says something about our relationship with ourselves. It says something about our self-esteem. So at all costs, preserve that relationship with your music, because it's really an instance of your relationship with yourself. It doesn't matter if it's full of technical flaws or we've still got a lot to learn. We want to be open and we want to be hungry for finding ways to improve our music and make it more impactful and to make it more able to express who we are. And that's why we go out for feedback, to find what we're missing, to have our blind spots exposed. But the essential thing is to keep that relationship with our music and keep the love for it, because that's what's going to keep us going. Another thing to remember is that it's not always personal when people react in a way that sometimes feels very personal. People have very different styles of communication. People work in different ways, and when you meet people in real life, you decide who you connect with, you decide who you develop a relationship with, because you're going to be attracted to people who think and work in the same way as you, and you're probably going to unconsciously filter out people with very different ways of thinking and working. But when you're online, anybody and everybody can reply, and some people will reply in what they would call a very open and direct way, what we might experience as an unnecessarily condescending and abusive way, but there's not necessarily any bad feeling from their point of view. That's just how they work, it's how they express themselves. And you wouldn't be attracted to somebody like that in real life. They'd find other people who found that sort of communication refreshing. But online you do, and they're fine with that. That's not disrespectful for them. They'd be perfectly comfortable if other people spoke to them in that sort of way, and they would probably interact with it in a very different way than you would. They'd be very, they'd probably enter into what might seem to you to be a fight, an unnecessary negative way of communicating. But if the two people are comfortable with that and that makes sense to them, it doesn't mean there's any bad feeling in it when they talk to you in that way. So that can be very difficult to sort of bring to reality, especially in written communication, which is what you get most often online, because that's very, so much gets lost as well in the written word. You don't hear a tone of voice, you don't see somebody's posture or you can't feel somebody's intention so effectively. But it's always quite an empowering thing to remember that what it sounds like to you isn't necessarily what their intention is. Finally, and probably the most powerful and simple tip that we have, is expect it and accept it. So it's not going to knock us off balance quite so much if we know when we put something out that there's a chance that something unsavory will come back. and to know that we'll manage that, to know that we're strong enough. We've got these strategies that we can use to try and avoid it. We've got these ideas of what we can do and how we can think differently to understand what it is when it happens. There's also things we can do to strengthen ourselves. If you know anything about me, I'm also a big fan of energy healing, and our sister YouTube channel, Heartful Healing, is all about energy healing, and it's got videos about things like the law of attraction and various sort of energetic processes that we can use to strengthen ourselves. I'm also a great fan of heartfulness meditation, which I've been doing for 25 years. It's been enormously powerful in really strengthening me from the inside and transforming my life and how I interact with the world. So there's those sorts of things that we can do as well. But if we know it's coming, it's going to be less debilitating to us. So hopefully that was useful. Next time we're going to start to get into more of what this channel is going to be about, because I think the way it's going is we're going to be starting to focus on various aspects of composing from the point of view of maybe beginner composers and composers who are inclined towards a different way of composing, a more intuitive way than the conventional way of formal study. So we're going to take aspects like maybe counterpoints, maybe rhythm, maybe syncopation, maybe using time signatures, maybe register, all of these things, and just think about how we can explore them and use them and have access to them in a different sort of way, but an equally powerful way. And for the next video, we'll be setting the scene for some of that. We'll be talking about how music theory can be made more accessible through this sort of approach to many, many more people. And then we'll start going into things like counterpoint and the other stuff. So look forward to seeing you next time.